Hello, comrades. Mr. Lassiter with you, and we today are going to look at the Russian Revolution and Russia's exit from the Great War, or as we've called it, World War One. So let's take a look at our video goals so we can get started. First, we want to look at why Russia exited World War One. Then we want to look at how the Bolsheviks, or as you may also know them, the communists, rise to power in Russia. We want to look at the civil war that breaks out following the Bolshevik rise to power, and then also try to understand how the communists ultimately succeed. A lot of vocabulary here. Make sure you get it in your notebook. Take a look at this map. We will return to this at the end of the lesson. This shows basically the revolutionary activity or Bolshevik activity from 1917 to 1918. It also shows the land that Russia is going to lose here in red by signing a treaty to end their involvement in World War I. So first, let's start with a little bit of background. Russia was, for the most part, unprepared for World War I. They had started to mobilize, but they were not ready to go to war. And as a result of this, they face heavy losses. 2 million killed, 4 to 6 million wounded or captured. And by the time 1917 rolls around, 3 years into the war, without much of an end in sight, the will to fight was gone. During the war, the leader of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, who was the absolute monarch, his power became questioned by the aristocracy in Russia, and other Russians became very impatient. For example, workers and peasants were hungry. They were suffering from the effects of war on the home front, not getting the supplies they needed. So this led to quite a bit of unrest. Add to this that the guy you see pictured here, Rasputin, had kind of gained access to the royal family, being the mentor of the wife of Nicholas II. Aristocrats were so worried about his influence that they had him actually assassinated, though it's said that it took multiple bullets and drowning to kill him. So what is all this? Where does all this unrest lead? Well, it leads to something called the March Revolution. In March of 1917, strikes began throughout Russia. Many of them were actually led by women, and they broke out in the city of Petrograd or St. Petersburg in response to the rising cost of food and especially bread during the war. Pretty soon, workers in Russia had joined women in demonstrating against the government. And these demonstrations get so bad and so dangerous that Nicholas II is actually forced by the legislature to step down or to abdicate the throne, ending the 300-year Romanov dynasty. Now, there's some people who support the Tsar, so there's many people in Russia, especially the socialists, worry that the Romanov dynasty might come back to power, and that will lead to certain actions that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the new government was led by Alexander Kerensky, who you see pictured on the right. But instead of ending the war like everyone wanted, he decided to stay the course and continues Russia's involvement in World War I. And that might be seen as the mistake of this new provisional government, because the government would soon be challenged by Soviets, who were mostly kind of socialist councils who were composed of representatives from workers and soldiers from all over Russia. And the most influential of these groups were the Bolsheviks, and they were going to have the biggest impact in Russia after this revolution. So keep in mind that the Bolsheviks began as a very small part of the Marxist Party. And if you remember Karl Marx, he put forth an idea of socialism in his book, The Communist Manifesto. And so this idea that there's this battle of the class systems, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The proletariat being the workers and the bourgeoisie being the owners of factories and industry. And so the Bolsheviks were like Marx. They hoped that they themselves, these workers, would rise up and throw off the bourgeoisie and therefore establish a more equal society without class systems, etc. So the most influential leader of these Bolsheviks and the one who led them in the revolution was the man you see pictured here to the right, Vladimir Lenin. Uh, they supported a violent revolution to destroy this capitalism that had taken Russia and had brought it into war, etc. So Lenin actually was located, he was not in Russia at the time, he was actually in Germany. And Germany decided to destabilize Russia. They should sneak Lenin back into Russia. And they put him on this windowless train and kind of sneak him into Russia to lead this Bolshevik uprising. And basically, Lenin's Bolsheviks promised several things which are extremely popular and get a lot of followers. Number one, they wanted to end Russia's involvement in the war. Two, they wanted to take the land from the aristocracy and redistribute it to peasants. Three, they wanted to transfer the ownership of factories from the capitalist bourgeoisie to the proletariat or the workers. Communist ideal, keep in mind. And lastly, transfer the government power to these Soviet groups. So in October 1917, or by October 1917, the Bolshevik power had grown to about 250,000. And in November, the Bolsheviks are going to seize power. They're going to seize the Winter Palace and take control of the government in what was known as the November Revolution. And after this revolution, there's a provisional government set up, run by the Soviets, but of course having the Bolsheviks and Lenin at its head. In fact, you can see a propaganda poster here showing Lenin coming in and sweeping away the monarchists, the people who supported the Tsar still, and other capitalists. You got the guy with the money bags there, and making a freer Russia. The quote there is reading, "Comrade Lenin cleanses the earth of filth," bringing in this new classless communist system. By early 19, Lenin had made good on his promise to end Russia's involvement in the war. They signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which formally ends Russia's involvement. However, they end up losing some territories of Poland, Ukraine, Finland, and some of the Baltic provinces. But Lenin believed this was a small price to pay because hopefully in the future this communist revolution in Russia would take the rest of Europe by storm, and those regions would once again be united by a common communist government. Of course, the communists don't win without a fight. They take control, but it's going to basically throw Russia into about a 3-year-long civil war with the communists on one side and then everybody else pretty much on the other. People who support the Tsar, other socialists who don't like Lenin, allied forces from Europe also give support to the people who are anti-Lenin. But ultimately, this communist Red Army fights and defeats their opponents. And in fighting, actually, they regained some of the territory they lost: Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. As a result of the war and the threat of these supporters of the monarchy coming back, Nicholas II and his entire family were captured, and eventually they were all murdered to prevent a return to the Romanov dynasty. And this was an important and symbolic gesture for this communist government that they were not going to support the old system with the aristocracy and bourgeoisie anymore. So why did the communists end up winning out? Well, partly it was due to their well-disciplined army, and also partly due to brutal policies. The opponents of these communists were not extremely disciplined. In fact, they didn't even get along with each other very well. You had people who supported the Romanov dynasty, and then you had people who were socialists who wanted to get rid of the Romanov dynasty but just didn't want Lenin in charge. So they aren't going to make good companions. Also, the government takes control of banks, industries, and farms to follow through on some of its early promises and control money in Russia. They also establish a secret police to get rid of anyone who opposed the new government. And even in some of the documents Lenin writes, he explains to the people why the secret police is needed and why they need to crack down on freedom of the press and the like. And he usually sets the people up as enemies of the people, enemies of the workers who work for the bourgeoisie and only want power back. So by 1921, basically what we see are the communists controlling Russia completely as one single centralized nation. And communism will continue in Russia, of course, until 1991. Here are your video goals. Take a look at them. Have a good day.